Hello, everyone. We're beginning our survey of the Catalan opening. And if you didn't notice, I have the board flipped because we're going to be investigating this opening from Black's perspective. In other words, if you're looking for a defense to the Catalan opening, you've come to the right place because this series of videos will be quite comprehensive. For you new players, let me introduce the Catalan Opening, which basically derives its name from a tournament that was played in 1929 in Barcelona, Spain. And it was named Catalan by one of the early grandmasters, Tartakower, in honor of Catalonia. And Barcelona happens to be the capital of that city, and that's where the name comes from. As far as the actual moves, it begins d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and g3. And this can be known as the modern form of the opening, although it can, excuse me, although it can occur after, for instance, d4, d5, c4, e6, g3, knight f6. Uh, this opening has been very consistent in popularity over the years. For white, it's been played by Alekhine, Botvinnik, Kasparov, Petrosian, and many others. Uh, Let me just show you the other move order. So, for instance, some people just play d5 right away instead of knight f6. So c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3. And this way is a common path to get to the open Catalan and the closed variations of the Catalan. Uh, what else can we say about this opening? The positions, the positions arise from other openings also, such as the Ready, Slav, Queen's Gambit. If you notice, they all have similar pawn structures, with pawns usually like this in the triangle setup. Also, from the English opening proper, the Catalan can arise, say for instance, starting out the game like that, and of course, it's easy to transpose, and you're right there. And also, Bogo Indian, when say after g3, bishop b4. So the opening can be very complicated. What else can we say about it? Uh, One of the main objectives is, let's go back. This opening is to, of course, fianchetto the bishop, and this Catalan bishop, as it's often called, is the prize of White's position. And the idea is that it will inhibit the development of Black's queen side, and in doing so, it prevents Black from going into the Queen's Indian defense. And furthermore, because the Queen's Indian defense requires b6 to be played, and with the bishop occupying g2, that is not possible straight away. And Black would have to do other things, for instance, d5, going into a Queen's Gambit decline type position, or play moves like c6 and d5, all positions not related to the Queen's Indian. Furthermore, since this knight is not being developed to c3, then white is also avoiding the Nimzo Indian, which would occur after knight c3, bishop b4. So with g3, white hinders black from playing two defenses here. So if you're a Nimzo Queen's Indian specialist, you're kind of out of luck here because that's one of the pluses of the Catalan Opening, and why a lot of people like to play that. So we're gonna get into it, and like I said, these videos are going to be very detailed. So let's get started. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight to f6, g3, d takes c4, and that's what we're going to be playing, the open Catalan, as opposed to trying to keep the position closed with c6, bishop g2, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and a5. And this position right here is or this variation rather, was brought into the spotlight by game between Vladimir Kramnik and Topalov, and it kind of never really went out of style. So what's the point of playing a5 here? Well, one must understand, first of all, that this bishop can be a major problem, and is basically the centerpiece of white setup. So the question that has to be dealt with immediately is, how do we deal with that bishop on g2? And as I've said in previous videos, there's about 3 ways to deal with the bishop, and a fianchettoed bishop in particular. One is to block the bishop. In other words, block his influence on the diagonal. So for instance, if we had a pawn on d5 and c6, for instance, along with this pawn on b7, it would blunt the bishop's action on the square, on the long diagonal. That's one way. Analogous to that, and we'll call it 1A, sometimes the bishop will block itself. For instance, putting a pawn on e4 and say d3, for instance, or d5. Or you see it in the King's Indian with the black pieces sometimes, where black will play e5 and d6, and the dark square bishop will be blocked in for a long time on g7. So that's one way to deal with the fianchettoed bishop. Excuse me, is to either set up your pawns in a way that blocks his action, and they call it biting on granite, or the opponent blocks himself in, but is still blocking nevertheless. The second way is to oppose the bishop, as if to trade it off. So for instance, you either want to try to get in a move like b6, and then place your bishop on b7 in opposition to this bishop on g2, or you want to play ideas like bishop d7, bishop c6, again with the same idea of trading this bishop off once this knight moves. The third idea is what I like to call a scorched earth policy, and that is to simply empty this diagonal. In other words, clear it of all pieces and pawns so that the bishop is just um, basically hitting thin air. For instance, have this pawn, say here, this rook is gone, and have the knight and bishop deployed somewhere where the bishop is basically just not doesn't have any targets. Those are the three ways basically of dealing uh, with the bishop. Keeping his activity down to a minimum. And if you can't stop the activity, and you try to trade it off, or you have the bishop in a position where it's not contributing anything meaningful to the position. And that's the last idea, is the scorched earth policy. Is basically the bishop's on a long diagonal, but then there's no targets to attack. So that's how you deal with the bishop, enemy bishop. So in this position, a5 has the third idea in mind. One of the most important points of this move a5 is that in certain positions, black is going to be playing b5. And notice here we'll have this majority on the queen side. I have 3 pawns to 2 pawns, which he would like to push. Another point of the move a5 is to move this rook to a6. And besides b5, then bishop a6 is also a possibility, along with knight b to d7. And again, the idea is to leave this diagonal completely empty so that so that white has no targets in the position. And this is basically the main tabia that we're going to be looking at. One more thing about the move a5, I just want to point out that bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, c6. Again, this is back to the policy of blunting the action of the bishop. c6, knight e5, opening up the bishop and having the idea of getting this pawn back. If b5 right here, which of course will be a question mark, knight takes c6, queen c7, and queen a5 just simply loses material here. So that's another idea why a5 gets played there also. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to look at the game between Kramnik and Topalov. So from this position, after move 6, bishop d2, a5, queen c2, putting pressure on the c pawn. So we can see that white is pretty much thinking about regaining this pawn immediately, and queen c2 is pretty much the most popular move. But there's other moves that can be done here. For instance, castle, knight c3 has been played, and even a3. Okay, but in this game, Vladimir Kramnik chose queen c2. So after queen c2, Topalov simply exchanged. Bishop takes d2 check. And now this kind of forces white to already have to think here. Does he play queen c2? Excuse me, queen takes d2, taking pressure off this pawn, or does he capture with the knight, bring a piece into the game, but perhaps to a square that he doesn't want to bring the knight to? So here, queen takes d2 was played, and Kramnik wants to probably bring the knight here. Okay, so after queen takes d2, c6. Now, although queen d2 looks kind of awkward, it still allows white to win his pawn back, and you'll see. So c6, and what's the idea behind c6? Of course, it's not just blunting this bishop, but black is actually threatening to play b5 and to hold this pawn. So, in other words, if black castled, knight e5, then he wouldn't be threatening to play b5 because the bishop is open on the diagonal. However, with c6, this is a genuine threat. So Kramnik plays a4 to shut it down. b5 anyway. And although black knows that he's not going to be able to keep up the pawn, keep up the pawn, keep the pawn. The idea is basically he's trying to get white to make concessions in order to regain it. So, for instance, so now after a takes b5, c takes b5, queen g5. So now he's attacking both pawns. Now this move was the point of Kramnik playing queen d2 earlier, when he had the choice of taking with the knight or taking with the queen. He put the queen on d2 because he had either prepared this or analyzed it some time ago. And now he's attacking two pawns at the same time, and he's going to get his pawn back. So castle, queen takes b5, and you can see Kramnik is moving the queen around a lot, and these are the concessions that I was speaking about, that he gets the pawn back, but he has to waste a lot of time in order to do it. And with this time, black is able to set up a good position. Bishop h6, gaining tempo, gaining a tempo right on the queen. And it's an interesting moment right here because this pawn is able to be captured. So at the time, anyway, this move Bishop a6 was a novelty. Now, Kramnik played Queen a4 here and didn't take the pawn. Queen takes a5 is definitely the critical line. So what's Black's idea here is not the capture here, but to simply play Bishop b7, and then we see this rook down here. So then it has to go Queen takes d8, and not Rook takes d8, but Rook takes d1, Queen takes f8 check. Followed, of course, by King takes f8, and that position is just very, just very challenging. So, practically speaking, it makes sense for Kramnik not to go into that. So he played Queen a4 instead. There's nothing wrong with that. Topalov followed that up with Queen b6, attacking the pawn on b2. Kramnik castled. And after castle, Queen takes b2. Knight bd2. Bishop b5. Knight takes c4, attacking the queen. Bishop takes. Excuse me. After knight takes c4, bishop takes a4. Knight takes b2, and the bishop return to b5, attacking the pawn on e2. Knight e5, and rook a7. And finally, Black realizes his scorched earth policy is there's nothing on the diagonal for white to hit, although he has very powerful influence on these squares. So Kramnik played bishop f3, protecting the pawn. Knight bd7. Knight e c4. Rook b8. And Black is pretty much made it out of the hot water. And the main point of this game is I just wanted you to see how the difference, the strategy that Black used to neutralize the power of this bishop. There's different strategies. Usually, the only strategy people know is to try to trade off the bishop. And some positions is really difficult just to trade off the bishop. So you have to know different strategies. Sometimes you're gonna blockade. Sometimes you're going to try to trade off, and sometimes you just got to clear the diagonal. And this is what Topalov's strategy here entailed. It's just clearing the diagonal. So rook fb1. Now Topalov is even here in the game, but as we know, Topalov is a very aggressive type player and real ambitious, a fighting player. And here he just goes for broke and plays g5. So e3 is played, g4, bishop d1, bishop c6, rook c1, looking for discoveries against his bishop. Bishop goes to e4. Knight a4 from Kramnik. Rook b4. Knight d6. Bishop f3. So, why did Topalov do this move right here? Basically, what he's trying to do is clear the way for this a pawn. So he wants to start getting rid of the defenders of the a4 square. So the bishop is one of them. Then hopefully he can force this knight and then this rook out of the way. So that's basically the plan. So bishop takes f3, g takes f3, knight c8, attacking the rook. Rook a8, knight e7 check, king g7, knight c6, attacking the other rook, rook b3, knight c5, and black could draw easily with just capturing on c5, but again Topalov feels that he probably has a better position. So after rook b5, h3 was played. Then knight takes c5, rook takes c5. Topalov goes to the seventh rank, or second rank rather. Rook g5 check, king h6. Most of the commentators said that king f8 was better. After that move, rook g takes a5. Rook takes a5. Then Kramnik played knight takes a5, which was an error. So better was rook takes a5. Then knight e4, attacking this pawn. Then white has to play knight e5, attacking f7. And then the idea behind that is if rook takes f2, then knight g4 check, picking up the rook after the fork. So instead, Kramnik played knight takes a5, knight e4, Topalov just attacks the f2 pawn, but notice white doesn't have the pressure that he had in the last variation. Rook f1, knight d2, rook c1, knight e4, rook f1. Notice Topalov has the draw if he wants, but he plays f6, knight c6, again knight d2, rook d1, knight e4, rook f1. It's almost like Kramnik is begging to draw this. Topalov says nope. King g6, knight d8, attacking this pawn. And this is the reason why the commentator said earlier that king f8 was better than going to king f6. And the reason why is because if the king was on f8, the king was here, the king could have easily defended by coming here. But notice the knight has this square under control, so black can't bring the king to defend this pawn right here on e6. So those small moves make a difference, and I'll show you what I'm talking about right here. You have to go all the way back here. This was the critical part. On move 34, rook g5, check. Black had the choice to go to h6 or to f8, and he chose to go to h6, attacking the rook, which looked respectable. I mean, he's attacking the rook, but king f8 was better. And so we see how now the black king cannot come to f7 to defend this pawn. Again, if he was on f8, he could have just stepped in with e6. So now his aggressively placed rook must come back on defense. And now white's passive rook can now go on offense. h5 from Topalov, rook a1 from Kramnik, h4, g takes h4, king h5, rook a2, king takes h4, king h2, king h5, rook c2, king to h6, rook to a2, king g6, rook c2, and we see that Kramnik is just trying to hold the position basically, and Topalov is trying to win the position. King f5, rook a2, rook b5, knight c6, rook b7, rook a5 check, king g6, rook a2, going back to defend f2 from the knight, and king h5. So at this point, black didn't realize that his winning chances were really diminished, and he lost his objectivity. Sometimes that happens as a chess player. Like you'll have a great advantage in a position, you'll be winning, and then you'll make a couple of bad mistakes, and then the position will be equal. But you were winning, say 5, 6 moves ago, and you're still kind of running off the inertia of that, and you're still playing the game as if you're winning, when really now you're just overreaching in the position. And that's kind of what happened to Topalov here. He had a nice position for so long and was pushing the initiative and pushing Kramnik around that when the tides turned, he didn't realize it and he kept playing in the same fashion. And what happened here is Kramnik played an awesome move, d5. Topalov played e5. Of course, after e takes d5, knight d4, and black's pawns are a mess, and they probably lose all three of them. So Topalov played e5. Rook a4, simply attacking the knight. And Topalov played f5, which was a tactical mistake, because after knight takes e5, these pawns are busted. So Topalov pretty much had to play knight takes f2. Interesting enough, he was threatening to take that pawn for many moves, and then when it's finally supposed to be taken, he doesn't take it. For instance, after knight takes f2, king g3, e4, and king takes f2, rook b2, check, and this leads to a perpetual. Of course, if king g3, then simply rook g2, and then if king f4, then f2, and rook a1, rook g1, and white would be lost. And that's what Topalov had to go in for. Instead, after rook a4, he played f5. Kramnik took, knight takes e5, rook b2. It looks fearsome enough. How's white gonna stop that? He plays knight d3. Attacking the rook. So there's no time to capture this. So rook b7. Now, more importantly, Topalov had missed the move here, because you might say, well, why not rook d2, attacking the knight and still maintaining pressure on the pawn. Well, if he does that, simple move rook d4 is winning for white. So Topalov had an oversight. So after rook b2, knight d3, rook b7, rook d4 was played, Rook b6, d6, knight takes d6, king g3, knight e4, king takes f3, and notice how quickly black pawns fall after they've been isolated. King g5, h4, check, king f6, rook d5, knight c3, attacking the rook, rook d8, rook b1, rook f8 check, king to e6, and that suffices to say for the record that white is winning, black is lost. But I'll show you the remaining moves since I showed you all of these moves already. Knight f4 check from Kramnik, king e5, rook e8 check, king f6, knight h5 check, king g6, knight g3, rook b2, h5 check, king f7, rook e5. There's another pawn that's getting ready to bite the dust. Knight d1. Black still trying to hold on to the dream of attacking the f pawn. Knight e2, blocking the action of the rook. King f6 and rook d5, attacking the knight here. And that is all she wrote. And white resigned. Now, don't judge the game by result. It was a sad game by Topalov. I mean, he's a fighting player. He just happened to overpress. So, uh, there was nothing that that black had to worry about in that game. I mean, black equalized. We'll just look at the opening real quick. d5, g3, d takes, bishop g2, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and a5. And black equalized like no problem. Alright, so that is it for now. In our next video, we're going to be continuing on in our survey of the Catalan Opening for the black side. Please like and subscribe, and feel free to ask any questions, and I'll see you on the next video.